Hey guys, my name's Nick. I'm a Microsoft Certified Expert Administrator. I create a lot of content for MSPs, and in today's video, I'm going to be covering the next-gen protection features for Microsoft Defender ATP. And recently, Microsoft has announced that they're going to be changing the name, so that's what I put there in parentheses. It's going to be called Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So just be aware of that. They said those changes will be coming towards the end of October and be rolling out slowly over the coming months into next year as well too. So just be aware of those name changes. But essentially here today in this video, the next generation protection features or settings that I'm going to be showing you are the Microsoft Defender Antivirus settings for Windows 10 devices. And this is within the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. But before I go in there and show you all the settings available, I just wanted to pull this up as well too to show you some of the stats as far as the features go on the next-gen protection settings in Microsoft Defender ATP. So a lot of these they tout of both the client and the cloud site to perform these machine learning techniques on the heuristics that are being reported and the information so they can do more with the information across not just your environment but across all customer environments as well too, to better assess these threats that are coming through and to remediate them on your behalf. So just wanted to show this. You can dive deep into a lot of these features later on if you really wanted to, but this is kind of what they're touting behind the scenes for this particular product. Additionally here, if we look at the next-gen protection pipeline, we're looking at this malware being filtered through multiple points here from the client all the way into the cloud and taking these suspicious files and detonating them in a sandbox environment for analysis and using this big data from their intelligent security graph to filter out what is good and what is not, and also identify trusted IPs and trusted reputations across various things and files that you may be accessing or pieces of software or emails in certain cases or URLs in other cases as well too. So this is all what's going on behind the scenes as well on the actual client device itself. So popping into the actual demo here, this is a Microsoft 365 tenant here with Microsoft 365 Business Premium and Defender ATP licensing within the portal. And this is the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. You guys may have been aware of this, the recent changes since Ignite of last year and the new endpoint security tab, which brings you to this page where you can define all of these different settings across the board. And most of these settings under the Manage tab are related to you also having Defender ATP set up as well. So some of these things you can do with the device profiles in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, but they also allow you to do them straight from this portal too, and it looks a lot cleaner in my opinion, just from an organization standpoint if you are using Microsoft Defender ATP. So I've already created a test profile here just for the purposes of showing the most I can in the demo, but we'll be walking through all of the various settings here for Windows 10, and we're selecting the Microsoft Defender Antivirus profile here. And as you're familiar, if you've used Endpoint Manager, you're just walking through a wizard here to define your scope and settings and assigning it to a certain group or all users. So in here we have some various settings that you can walk through, and I'll be walking through each one of these just to kind of explain it briefly. So the turn on cloud delivered protection here, the good part about the settings here, most of them have this little information icon that you can use to see what this actually means if you're not familiar. And it, in most cases, tells you what not configured means, in the sense of, if I say not configured, is this turned on? Or what does these other selections mean here? So with this one, it's basically just telling you that it's going to send this information to Microsoft about any problems it finds and analyze that information. And this is something that you want to have turned on and is turned on by default. The main differences here, and you'll see this with multiple settings, is the fact that if you select yes here, then the actual end user cannot change this setting if you give them access to see the Defender app within their particular platform. When I say that, let me show you real quick what I mean. So on a client computer here, you have the ability to go to the Windows security section, and these settings here will only be available to them if you've given them that level of access, and they can come in here and they can change certain options if they wanted to, if you're allowing that access again on there. And in the advanced settings, you can also do things that you may not be able to do if you lock down their protection. So that's what we're saying by you say yes, you want to enforce this without them to have the ability to change it. So back in the management portal here, I typically like to change these here just so you have predefined settings. In most cases, you're not going to want your users to modify these at all after the fact. So a lot of them you will designate as yes versus not configured. So the next one here, the cloud protection level, Microsoft does recommend to leave this at not configured. It does a baseline level of protection that they feel is adequate without creating too many false positives. But if you wanted to, you could dial this up to high or high plus or zero tolerance. And they just simply get more restrictive all the way up to zero tolerance, which means that any unknown executables will be blocked. So you can decide based off your customer environment what you want to do here in the sense of high or high plus. If you're going to test this, I would definitely test it with high in a pilot group just to see kind of their exposure and what gets quarantined and things like that. But you want to slowly roll this out across your customer base if you do choose to define some higher settings here for this particular one. As far as the Defender Cloud extended timeout in seconds, this one, it automatically blocks suspicious files for 10 seconds while it scans them in the cloud to make sure they're safe. You can add up to 50 additional seconds to this timeout if you really wanted to. So typically, you may want to put this at 30 or something like that, but it's up to you if you really want to configure that as well. The next one here, we have Defender exclusions. So with this, your mindset needs to be, this is binary. This isn't something you think will happen. This is something that you know would get blocked just based off your environment with the customer, and you can add to this over time. But a good recommendation is to come back here periodically to review this to see if this is still needed, because obviously we want the environment to be as locked down as possible without inhibiting user productivity. So with this one, you can choose certain processes to define here, certain extensions to exclude, and certain files and folders to exclude here in the actual scanning that goes on. And these may be particular your environment that you found to have been detected as malicious in the past, or because there are certain files for pen testing or something like that that you might be doing or be using. Or you just don't want them to scan at all, you don't want them to be touched and consume that as part of their process. Additionally, you can come into the Security Center as well to add additional indicators for exclusion. So I'll show you that right now as well too. In the Defender Security Center here, I've gone under the Settings tab and I've gone to Indicators. And with this, you'll need to turn on, if you see a yellow message up here that says you need to turn on certain features, you'll need to come into advanced features here, and you'll want to turn on the custom network indicators. So you can actually add some to whitelist or block if you really wanted to as well too. But then after you do here, you can add certain things like file hashes, IP addresses, URLs, and domains and certificates. So these are just certain things, again, if you've turned on certain settings within here, which you'll see in the antivirus settings, there may be certain URLs, domains, IP addresses, or file hashes that you don't want to block, and that might be detected by the actual service. So this is another way you can whitelist those if you really wanted to. The next section here is the real-time protection. So for real-time protection here, there's a variety of different settings here. And this first one is turn on real-time protection, which is already on by default, but this is one again where you could not allow the end user to modify that on their actual end device. Enable on-access protection. This is something where you can have the virus protection continuously active versus on demand with the scans that you do below. So I do recommend that you turn this one on as well too. Just be aware that it will take up some of the CPU capacity as well. So that's a consideration. If you start to get complaints about that, that may be something you want to just turn off. So with monitoring for incoming and outgoing files here, it's defaulted to monitor all files. And this is what I recommend if you're looking at just endpoint. But if you're looking at a server, this may be different. If you're wanting to basically decide if you want to do both incoming or outgoing, and they mention that here in this as well too, but there's specific scenarios you have where you only want to do one or the other. But in most cases for end clients, you want to do monitor all files. For behavior monitoring, this one is again turn on by default, but the end user could change it. You definitely want this one to be on. Turn on network protection is off by default. So I like to turn this one on to detect malicious URLs and executables that are downloaded as well too. Scan all downloaded files and attachments. This one again is set to on by default, but the user can change it, so we change it to yes. Scan scripts that are used in Microsoft browsers. I don't believe a lot of you are using Edge, so this may not be applicable to you, but it's on by default if you are. So again, just another one of those end user ones. Scan network files. This one here is disabled, so you can choose to enable it, which I do recommend. And scan emails as well too is optional, but by default it's off. So you can also choose to scan this one. Another thing I didn't mention earlier is if you are using another third-party AV, you can turn this on as well too, but it will go into a passive mode. So it's really doing more of an audit versus an enforcement. It allows the third party to take the active control of the settings there. So just keep that in mind. And the actual service itself won't work as well with the EDR solution or the TVM solution as part of the Defender ATP service if you're using a third party as well too. So with the remediation section here, after this loads up, this is specifying the number of days to keep quarantine malware, and by default there's nothing here, so it'll keep it indefinitely, or you could put 0 as it mentions here in the infographic, and you could also define, typically it's recommended obviously define the retention period for this as well too, so you may just want to put 90 days in there. And submit samples consent. This is something where what they call safe samples is saying that there's no personal information in the sample that you're allowing to send to Microsoft. And so if you have HIPAA clients or other clients in that nature, you definitely want to send this on. I honestly think it's good for any client, whether or not they're regulated. So it's just getting their consent and the end user's consent. It does require their interaction to say, yep, go ahead and send this to Microsoft. If it's detected as malicious, but I would always turn this on, especially it's a requirement if you're HIPAA. Action to take on potentially unwanted apps. This is off by default. You could turn it into an audit mode. So it's basically just going to collect telemetry on some unwanted software, potentially malicious, and you could just enable it there so this software isn't installed. I honestly like that better. You need to make sure though that you have a formal process for them to submit some type of ticket that says this is a new piece of software I want to have for the company. It could also help you reduce shadow IT as well. So some of the actions for detected threats, you can configure this if you really want to. Microsoft classifies low, moderate, high, and severe based off of the telemetry they're gathering, based off the machine learning that's going on. And so you can decide what you want to do for each one of these as far as the items here in this particular section. And with this, when you're looking at the particular severity and action to take, clean really is something where the service tries to recover the files and tries to disinfect them. This obviously just moves it to quarantine. This removes it from the device altogether versus having it in quarantine and being able to restore it from there. This allows the file to go through. You're basically just whitelisting it. User defined allows the user to make the decision, which typically is not a really good use. I don't recommend doing that. And then block, and then obviously just blocks the file execution here. So in a lot of cases for these lower ones, you want to go to like a quarantine just so it's still on there. And then as you move up, you move more into a remove or a block. I don't recommend doing user defined in most cases at all. So the next section here is scan. You can scan archive files. These are like zip files as well. By default, it's on. Again, another one of these where just user could change it if they had access. Use low CPU priority for scheduled scans. You can choose to set this or not. It's up to you again on what their environment's looking like, what their computer's looking like. Usually it's a best recommendation to say yes for this one. This one, disable catch up at full scan. I like to set this and the other one to yes. So it's saying if the computer's offline and it's missed some of the scheduled scans you've defined, it's going to run a scan immediately upon that user logging back into the device. With the CPU scan limit usage or usage limit per scan, you can specify it as a percentage, and it's from 0 to 100. So if you really wanted to get granular with this, if you've had a lot of bandwidth issues, not bandwidth issues, but CPU issues when your user is reporting that maybe you want to dial this back or up depending on the scenario in those particular cases. So with these, this one I just want to point out as well too. This is contradictory to what you would think because it says disable catch-up quick scan. But if you'll notice and you read their documentation, which I'll link below, catch-up scans for quick scans will be enforced and the user cannot disable them. So I may just be misinterpreting that, but it seems not like the correct language there. But scan map network drives during full scan. This does this automatically, again, by default, but you can change it to yes there. Run a daily quick scan at, and you can define the time period. If it's not configured, it's going to do 2 a.m. And you can decide, again, depending on the client, what that looks like. And this is defined in their local time zone that's on their device itself. Scan type is another one here where you can change to do the schedule scan for the settings below. So this is always going to run this quick scan at a certain time, but you can also do a full scan here, choose the day of the week to run this, and again, this will probably be a preference based off the client or when you do your patching or something like that. You'll have to configure this in a certain manner, but again, you could do this on certain days, and you can also let the user pick when they want to do these scans as well too, which may not be the worst case in this particular scenario because they know obviously when the computer will be on, but they'll be offline and not have this affected. I mean, they're used to that with their cellular devices and things like that too. So it wouldn't be that big of a deal to do user defined as well too. And then you would want to put this at the maybe not configured state as well too. And then you can say that you want to check for signature updates. So this is a personal preference, obviously, depending on when you're patching as well. So again, that'll be up to you. So for updates here, this is telling you how often you want to check for security intelligence updates. And this is directly correlated with the signatures there. And you can see that it says 1 for checking every hour, 2 checking 2 hours, and by default it's every 8 hours. So again, you want to align this with your patching schedule and what that looks like for you, just to make sure you're not conflicting there. And then define the file shares for downloading the definition updates. If you have file shares, you can add them here as well. Define the order of sources for downloading definition updates. Again, you can choose here from the list that you want to have and pick which ones that you would want in a particular order. And then this one is funny that it's down at the bottom here, just because you've gone through this list of defining things that you don't want the user to touch, and then it's saying, hey, do you want the user to even access the Defender app? So you can block them completely from seeing this, and maybe then you wouldn't have had to change all those up top. But this is, again, personal preference. You could allow them to view this information if you really wanted to, or if you said, hey, I want to allow them to define what times they want to get the scan, maybe you don't want to block this out or anything. So when you click on next, I'm going to skip scope tags, and then you can assign the groups here that you want to apply it to. So you may have different settings for different groups that you want to roll out in some cases, or other cases you could just do all users, all devices, things like that. And then going into, the full settings here where you can create the actual policy. So again, I already created one, so I'm not going to finish that up here. I've got my test profile. When you apply this out, it'll begin to collect the telemetry on what's in error, what's in conflict here. It'll have a device status and a user status. So it's got this telemetry for me here too, so I can narrow down what's going on. And then I've got my full list here where it shows me if there's conflicts from my settings and what those might be. So a lot of these, one of these I had here was the fact that I had another device profile that had conflicting information where I said, hey, they can allow, I will allow them to access the Defender app. And my other profile for device restrictions was saying that they can access this information. So just be careful if you do have other policies out. That's what leads to these conflicts, and you can see, the security configurations here at the device level as well. If you want, right after you create the actual profile, I like to go into a certain test device, right, that I've set up as far as part of being in a pilot or something like that, and then clicking on sync here just to make sure they get those settings. But then afterwards, you'll pull this up here, and if you go into the settings in manage providers, you'll have Defender Antivirus on there, and the settings you provided will have pulled down here that they can then either modify if you've allowed them to, or not have access to in certain cases as well too. So like this one here, I'm not allowing them to change these settings, and it just says, hey, this is managed by your administrator. So that's everything that I wanted to show for you guys in this video. If you have any questions or comments around the next gen protection or the antivirus settings, feel free to comment them below. Otherwise, please like or subscribe to the channel if you guys want to see more content around Microsoft 365 and the MSP space. Thanks guys, have a great day.